There's an interesting example of loserthink in the news I like to call out. Now, let me define loserthink for you. It's the title of my new book coming out November 5th. But I'll give you a little preview of what the theme is. The theme is that people who have experience across various different fields of study, be they history, psychology, economics, business, technology, engineering, whatever the fields are, the people who have broader experience, at least in the thinking styles, not all the details, not all of the skills of those different disciplines, but if you've been exposed to the way they think, you're way ahead in understanding your world and communicating well. I'll give you a trivial example. If you had never heard of science, would it ever occur to you that you should do controlled experiments and double blinds and stuff like that? Probably not, right? Because those things were not obvious until who was it? Newton, Isaac Newton, I think, was sort of the thought founder of a lot of science. You can help me with the details, but the point is, throughout much of human history, it wasn't obvious that you needed a controlled experiment and that you could rigorously test your way to something good. Now think how handicapped you'd be if you were a modern, person in the modern world and you never heard of science. Now you don't have to be a scientist to know that controlled experiments make sense. Those are easy to explain. All right, so I'm going to take that concept. I'm going to apply it to a conversation between, sort of a public conversation, I guess. Bill Maher, who did a monologue in favor of fat shaming. In other words, his point was we should shame people to lose weight because of the health benefits, economic benefits, societal benefits. So James Corden, who I think you know him from whichever late night show he's on. He's got a very impressive body work in the entertainment industry. So the first thing I'm going to say about James Corden is very successful. I'm guessing very smart, because if you look at the body of his work, it's pretty broad in the entertainment industry. It's very impressive. But I checked to see what his educational background is, and it's not science, it's not engineering, it's not economics, it's not business. Now, if somebody did not have an educational background in those things, one should expect that they don't maybe have a full grasp, if they haven't been exposed to those things, of what to do exactly in every situation, because those are pretty useful fields. So let me give you an example of what James Corden said. Now, apparently James Corden has been struggling with his own weight for years. I had to look at a picture of him to see what he was talking about. And I don't know, maybe it's because he works in LA, but he doesn't look fat to me. I don't know what he's talking about. Now, I get that James Corden seems to have some genes that make him a little rounder. Maybe he holds fat more strongly than other people. So anyway, the point is James Corden believes he's overweight. So that's his self-assessment. I don't really see it in the pictures in any way that would be, in any way I would call fat in America. By American standards, certainly not. But he probably lives and works in LA, so it probably feels like that to him. And I imagine it's gone up and down over time. But here's what he said. So James Corden said this, quote, "If making fun of fat people made them lose weight, there'd be no fat kids in school, and I'd have a six-pack right now." Now, in this mode, he was trying to make a serious point. He wasn't making jokes. Now, if it were a joke, I wouldn't say, well, let's look at it factually and pull it apart and see if it makes sense. But it wasn't a joke. He said it in sort of an interesting way, but it's obviously a serious point in which he's saying that fat shaming doesn't work. Because if it did, obviously every single kid gets fat shamed if they're fat. So how many of you think that's a good point? In the comments, we'll do a fun little thing. Is James Corden making a good point? That given that every kid who's overweight gets fat shamed, you can guarantee that. Zero kids who are overweight do not get fat shamed. So we wouldn't see any fat people if it worked, right? Is that true? So I'm looking at your comments and look at the mix. A lot of you saying yes, a lot of you saying no. Why is it that it looks like about half of you are on yes, half of you are on no? Why is it that you disagree on such a simple question? And here's my hypothesis. Now, this won't be true for every one of you. I'm going to make a general statement. My hypothesis is the people who say this makes sense, on average, not every single person, you could be the exception, but on average, the people who think that James Corden is making sense probably have a similar educational background. This is my speculation. Secondly, the people who say he does not make sense probably have backgrounds that are more like economics, probably more like business, maybe more like engineering, maybe more like science, or at least have been exposed to enough of those things that they know how those fields think. Here's what's wrong with James Corden's sentence, and I'll read it again and then tell you why it's completely irrational, okay? If making fun of fat people made them lose weight, there'd be no fat kids in school. Here's what's wrong with this, and half of you already know it. The other half are going to learn it for the first time. We don't know what would have happened if this were a controlled experiment. See? You see where this is going? If this were a controlled experiment, we might learn that 90% of people who are fat shamed go ahead and lose weight. We might find that 10% do. But the thing we don't know is what would happen if we did the experiment. So and let me say, I should throw my opinion in here just so I don't get lumped in with one of the two opinions I'm talking about. My opinion is closer to James Corden's opinion that the fat shaming is not good for society. I just have different reasons for it. So I'm anti-fat shaming, but his reason he gave is that if fat shaming worked, there wouldn't be any fat kids in school, and that is a very, that's sort of an artist opinion. If all of your education was in the arts, you wouldn't know that there was anything wrong with that opinion. If you were a scientist, I'll bet everyone here who had a scientific background said, oh, no controlled experiment. No controlled experiment. Your statement is absolutely just a guess. And half of you took that statement, which is nothing more than a speculative guess, and said, oh yeah, that's true. There would be no fat kids if fat shaming worked. I guess that would take care of it all. So here's the big picture. The big picture is if you'd been exposed to some of the other more productive fields, the way they think, you don't have to be expert in any of them, but if you just knew how they think, you would have picked this up immediately.